So the Royals are one of the most aggressive teams going into the trade deadline. We'll tell you why that's important next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. And you can also catch us on wherever you get your podcasts, as can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you are a first-time listener and you want to know a little bit more about me and this show, well, I am based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, doing some hosting, co-hosting, and some producing as well. So on the day-to-day in the sports world, I stay pretty busy over there. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you are going to be getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Today's show is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah, the right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your rivals. Check out Booking.com for your stay today. We are now under 10 days from the trade deadline, and even after the Royals had made their move to acquire Hunter Harvey, there are reports out there, and I would say very credible reports, that the Royals are far from done in adding to this team. And I thought it was the perfect time to do a little bit of trade deadline talk. We actually teased that in yesterday's episode, and I know for the most part, sometimes we tease a segment in an episode before, and it doesn't always work out that way. It's really just dependent on, what happens over the course of those few hours before our next show. But this one was in my mind last night. This stayed in my mind this morning because it comes from Jeff Passan. And Jeff Passan is very widely known by baseball fans everywhere, national reporter, Kansas City ties, and I think very much in the know about what a lot of teams are doing out there for the trade deadline. But this one, I think, caught me a little bit off guard, but also I think excites me to a level that I haven't been at for the trade deadline in probably 7 years or so. I think since 2017, the last time the Royals even had a chance to be buyers at the trade deadline. But this was put out there in Jeff Passan's latest article on ESPN, done this morning. And I was able to go through all the teams that he said were going to be all in, all out, buying with caution, different terms for every team. The Royals were in that category of buying if it makes sense. But this was from the little excerpt that he wrote on the Royals. The Royals remain interested in adding another late inning reliever and a bat. They would prefer to grab an outfielder. And then to close out that little paragraph, says the Royals are among the game's most active teams and looking for upgrades. So if that doesn't raise your eyebrows, I don't know what will. To say that the Royals and J.J. Picollo in this front office are going to be aggressive going into the trade deadline, despite a weaker farm system, it tells you all you need to know about the intentions of this organization, about the shift that we've seen from Dayton Moore to J.J. Picollo, and what maybe we can expect, going into the 2024 trade deadline. And there are a few moving parts with this. I believe that, this is a team that isn't going to be buying in the way that the Dodgers will be. This is not going to be a team that's going to be buying in the way that the Orioles are, right? They don't have the resources. They don't have the top 100s to go out there and get it done. But there are players out there they can afford and they can acquire. And I'm sure at this point, and as we are recording this podcast, J.J. Picollo is trying to make things happen. I mean, if this was one reporter out there or maybe a blogging site that was just kind of hearing rumors and it was, well, the Royals are active, but how active can they really be? I think I wouldn't have spun this into a segment. But the fact that it's Jeff Passan, it makes you think a lot differently. And to know that it's narrowed down to another late inning reliever and an outfield bat. I think there are a few names that come to mind because the market's not that big for back-end relievers and also for outfield bats. I think for the reliever market, you're looking at the obvious names: Carlos Estevez, Tanner Scott, Michael Kopech, Lucas Ursig, Austin Adams. Those seem to be some common names that are brought up. If you want to look at the Chicago Cubs, who mentioned that they were going to be selling, barring any crazy changes this week, Mark Leiter Jr. is another guy I think would fit very nicely into this bullpen and has great advanced numbers to really make you feel good about maybe giving up a top 10 prospect in your system or two at that, because I think you'd be getting a really good reliever. From the outfield bat market, yeah, it's going to be Tommy Pham, Jazz Chisholm, Taylor Ward, Jesse Winker. Those feel like the common names that keep being brought up. Brent Rooker, yes, but I don't think the Royals have what Brent Rooker is going to cost. It's probably more so in the ballpark of Tommy Pham, Taylor Ward, and Jesse Winker. Could be wrong on that. Just a gut feeling that I have. But more importantly here, I think it shows the absolute shift that we've seen in ownership and also front office management about the Royals. The Royals are 11 games over 500. To a lot of people out there, it would seem like they, struck gold with the offseason signings that they had, but it's fool's gold, right? That eventually it's going to run out and, they're not really a World Series contender. Well, it doesn't appear that J.J. Picollo and John Sherman and all those folks up there in the front office believe that it's fool's gold. And you know what? You shouldn't make any moves because eventually it's going to run out. They have remained very consistent since the offseason that they are going to give their current players a shot. They gave Bobby Witt Jr. the long contract and told him, we're going to build a winner here. We're going to give you the ability to compete every single year. And if we're in it, if we're in the hunt, we're going to reward those guys that we brought in with adding talent to help them get over the edge, to help them get into the playoffs. And now that we have heard from credible sources, the Royals aren't just active. They are among the league's most active, not just active, among the league's most active. It tells you all you need to know. And that should give you more confidence that another move or two is coming, because the Royals, I don't think, would go from one of the league's most active to not pulling off any sort of move. I'd imagine in the next week or so, they are going to pull off one or two more moves before the trade deadline gets here and you can't acquire any more talent. And that is a nice change, because this is a change that we haven't seen in Kansas City in quite some time. This is an opportunity to capitalize on one of the more improbable seasons in Royals history. And I say that because last year, when we were recording podcasts before the trade deadline, how excited were you to hear me talk about prospects that would be 4 to 5 years away and trading away Scott Barlow and Ryan Yarbrough and, barely any notable guys? How exciting was that to you? This is a complete difference. And it shows you how drastically things can change in 1 year. I mean, I'm not trying to be a mouthpiece to the organization. I'm not affiliated with the Royals organization. We do this podcast covering the Royals, but I don't get paid anything from the Royals to talk positively about their team, their coaches, their front office members. But I can sit here today and say with 100% confidence that J.J. Picollo deserves flowers for what this season has already been and what it seems like it's barreling toward with the trade deadline. I mean, how many times have we seen in baseball a team that overachieved before the trade deadline and the front office go, well, we don't really believe that that's going to be sustainable, so we're not going to make any moves. And then that team never really stays competitive, right? They may try to build up with prospects and try to make a run like the Orioles did, but the Orioles feel like a one-off here. The Orioles and the Astros feel like the only two teams that had a full teardown, rebuilt for a number of years, and then hit on nearly every single prospect. I look at some of the past moves the Royals made at the trade deadline and what they gave up. At the end of the day, I don't feel like they got significantly burned. Post-2010, there have been moves that, of course, burned them. And not all of these are trade deadline moves, but the trade for Wade Davis and James Shields and Elliott Johnson, they give up Will Myers, who was deemed as the next great Royal. Will Myers was fine for early on in his career, but he's never tortured the Royals. And the Royals won a World Series after that. And they wouldn't have won it if they didn't make that deal. Same thing was the Zach Greinke trade to Milwaukee, the guys they brought in. Now, on the flip side of that, those two were different scenarios. If we're talking trade deadline scenarios, going back to 2015, the Royals go out there and get Johnny Cueto. Well, they give up Brandon Finnegan, John Lamb, and Cody Reed. None of those guys really became big-time pitchers at the big league level. At the time, we thought that might have been too much to give up for Johnny Cueto. Ben Zobrist, they trade Sean Manaea away. Sean Manaea had a successful big league career, but would you sit here and say that it was a too expensive move, that it haunts the Royals? No, because the Royals won a World Series. Even the 2017 deal, in which they acquired Trevor Cahill, Brandon Maurer, Ryan Buchter, it stings because none of those three guys did really anything for the Royals. But who they gave up, Estuary Ruiz was seen as this great big prospect that had, a couple of tools you could maybe mold into having 3 or 4 at the big league level. He hasn't really become much for Oakland. Yeah, Matt Strahm was an all-star, but it took him a long time to become a very consistent reliever. And then you look at the final piece in that, which was, I'm already blanking on the name of who the third and final piece was the Royals traded away. It might have just been 2. Now, I was Travis Wood, and Travis Wood was already a big leaguer, so it didn't really matter that much. Melky Cabrera, I think they gave up Brian Brickhouse, if I'm not mistaken. Never really did much. So you're looking at this trade deadline. I think you go, yeah, you could be scared of giving up prospects, but the Royals have gotten burned before, but it's not always been about trade deadline acquisitions. They've been sellers before, and they've traded away guys that went and shined elsewhere, and those prospects didn't become much. But I look at this being a different beast. You're trying to acquire major league talent and give up prospects. Yeah, those prospects could become something, but it's also a long shot. And if you're trying to turn this into a playoff season to give yourself a chance, I'm very curious who the Royals are trying to work out deals with and acquire talent for the big league level. But per Jeff Passan, the Royals are one of the league's most active right before the trade deadline. We're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, did Bobby Witt Jr. get hit on purpose last night? I'll give you my thoughts next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Have a few sponsors I want to give a shout out to, starting with Booking.com. With summer travel heating up, especially for baseball games, it's time to explore those cities you've always secretly wanted to learn more about. Yes, talking about your rivals' cities. With hotels, bed and breakfasts, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com, you might just find your perfect stay, even in your rival's city. Now, I'll be out in San Diego coming up at the end of August. I'll be out there for a wedding. We'll be staying in downtown San Diego, so I am going to be going through Booking.com to take care of all of that stuff, just so I can find the right hotel that suits me, make sure I can have a great stay that weekend. Did it not too long ago for San Francisco and Arlington. So if you're thinking about booking a place, go through Booking.com. From hotels that look over stadiums to family-friendly resorts, Booking.com has so many choices across the U.S. for your summer travel this season. The right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your rivals. Book today on Booking.com on the site or on the Booking.com app. Also want to tell you about FanDuel, and we know that playoff baseball is just now a couple months away. We got college football that's right around the corner. Same thing with NFL. So why don't you head over to FanDuel and start placing some bets? Maybe get warmed up on the MLB regular season before the playoffs. Maybe get you warmed up for week 1 of the college or the NFL season. Because we know with the NBA playoffs being wrapped up, you're kind of looking for that thrill again. With baseball being played every single day, maybe you're not into it as much, but now you can get your practice over at FanDuel. Because with FanDuel this summer, they're hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. And if you're thinking about putting some money down tonight, hell, why not go for Bobby Witt Jr. getting more than 2 hits? He's had 3 hits in 4 straight games. Feels like he can do this again tonight against lefty and Jordan Montgomery. So that's where I put some money down if you are heading over to FanDuel. Last night, there was some fireworks at the K, and no, not the big sparkly ones that light up in the sky on Friday nights at Kauffman Stadium. No, the fireworks are in relation to the tempers flaring at Kauffman Stadium because as Bobby Witt Jr. was approaching the plate on the verge of getting the Royals' first cycle since George Brett did it in 1990, almost 34 years ago to the date. It was July 25th, 1990, as long as I didn't get that wrong, for George Brett getting that cycle for the Royals. And they've had this 34-year drought. So Bobby Witt Jr. comes up to the plate. He's been hitting over 800 since the second half. It's only 4 games, but still, 800 is not even video game numbers. That's just, fantasy numbers. Let's just call it that. Not fantasy baseball. I'm talking just made up numbers. That sounds like something you'd see in a movie when there's cartoon characters involved, hitting over 800, even if it is 4 games. But it was Humberto Castellanos that decides to run a sinker inside on Bobby Witt Jr., and it plunks him on the forearm or the bicep or the shoulder, whatever you want to say. It was noticeable enough that it caught the attention, of course, of everybody at Kauffman Stadium, caught the attention of Salvador Perez in the Royals dugout, and they were irate at the fact that Bobby Witt Jr. got hit on the first pitch of that at bat. The Royals later retaliated, I'll put that in air quotes there, with John Schreiber throwing a sinker, kind of midsection and in, that hit Gabby Moreno. And that led to some ejections, one being Torey Lovullo, the manager of the Diamondbacks. You get the whole spiel at this point. The matter at hand here was Bobby Witt Jr. hit intentionally? And Torey Lovullo said no. The Royals at the time likely felt that he was hit intentionally. Here's my stance on it. Bobby Witt Jr. had been crushing every pitch that was thrown his way for the last 4 games. And the Diamondbacks had given up a triple, a double, and a home run, and the game was out of hand at that point. Now, Humberto Castellanos is not a rookie that had a moment that was too big for him. He was amped up. He's been pitching in the big since 2020. So I know that when you are a 3 or 4 or 5 year veteran, you're going to have pitches that slip. Maybe not on nights where it's 80 degrees and there's been no precipitation or no rain out there. I think the intention was, let's make them a little uncomfortable. We're going to work inside here. We are not going to throw a sinker or fastball right down the middle that Miguel Castro did, which led to a bomb by Bobby Witt Jr. We need to back him off the plate a little bit. And the sinker that he threw rode too much inside, and it plunked him. And on the first pitch of the at-bat, that's always going to raise eyebrows. I think the Royals had every right to be mad. I think they had every right to throw John Schreiber back out there and get some payback there. An eye for an eye, as somebody would say. But I do believe Torey Lovullo to an extent that it wasn't intentional. Why would we hit Bobby Witt Jr. Just because we didn't want him to get the cycle? It's a blowout game. It does us no benefit to hit him on the first pitch. But I do think the decision was to line up inside and move him off the plate a little bit, make him more uncomfortable, because let's be honest, how comfortable has Bobby Witt Jr. been at the plate in these last 4 games? He's 12 for 15. I mean, nobody can get him out. So he's standing in the box there feeling like every pitch that's thrown his way is going to be smoked. And the Diamondbacks probably wanted to pitch around him. And that first pitch was to brush him off the plate a little bit. Not run one under his chin, not a little chin music, none of that. But I think it was to be a sinker to make him back off a little bit. And then they could throw some sliders down in the way, try to get him to chase, but they weren't going to throw him a super hittable pitch. And that was my main takeaway with it. I never got this vibe that Humberto Castellanos was going out there and his pride took over and he's thinking, well, if you want me to walk him, I'm just going to hit him. But the Royals have every right to be upset and be angry. It reminded me of when Altavilla hit Mookie Betts on the hand and fractured his hand. I thought the Royals were very fortunate and very lucky to get out of Dodger Stadium without the Dodgers retaliating. And I know that there wasn't, many innings left and it was still a closer game. The Royals were fortunate there because if you hit a star player, it doesn't matter if it's intentional or not. If you hit them with a fastball and it leaves a mark and it kind of makes the hitter, the star, wince a little bit, you just can't be that surprised if the team comes back and plunks one of yours. And that's why it was okay that, John Schreiber fell behind in the count. He threw one of his sinkers that wasn't going to do serious damage. It plunked Gabby Moreno, and he flipped his bat back to the dugout and went to first base. He's a catcher. He probably knew that one of those pitches was going to hit one of the 3 guys that John Schreiber faced, or one of the 4 guys that John Schreiber faced in the inning. And it was Torey Lovullo that got really mad. But I also understand he has to get ejected in a spot like that because he felt like that was pure retaliation. I got to stand up for Gabby Moreno, and I got to get tossed in a game like this. So I think all things considered, the Royals handled it fine. Even though this is going to sound unpopular, I mean, Torey Lovullo, I think, handled things fine in the post game as well. Yeah, you could say he was acting crazy, get ejected. We've seen so many managers do that. And I thought Jordan Baker and the umpiring crew, though I'm very harsh on umpires, thought they did a fine job. Warned both sides. Next one that, hits somebody, you're probably getting tossed in that game. Nothing else happened. The Royals won. They moved on. But to answer the question I posed, no, I do not think Bobby Witt Jr. was hit intentionally, but I also believe the Royals had every right to get angry that pitch hit Bobby Witt Jr. and prevented him from having a chance at getting history for the Royals in front of all their fans at Kauffman Stadium. Okay, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, we're going to talk about this job that J.J. Picollo has done in just 1 year, but maybe we'll go further back and look at everything he's done in a 2-year sample size as this president of baseball operations and acting general manager of the Kansas City Royals. But before we do that, I want to give a shout out to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. When we come back, let's praise J.J. Picollo for the job that he's done in just 2 years without Dayton Moore. We'll dive into that next on Locked On Royals. You are tuning to Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. We got 2 more sponsors to give a shout out to, and we're going to start it off with eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. They're eligible items only. Exclusions apply. And eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Also want to tell you about PrizePicks. And with PrizePicks, it's America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active members. It's also the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy baseball. And unlike other apps, it's just you against the numbers. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Get in on the daily action with your friends and become part of the PrizePicks community today. You can win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks with as little as 4 correct picks. You can turn $10 into $1,000. And if you're looking for promotions, PrizePicks has got you covered every week, from lowering select player stat projections on Tuesdays to help your lineup hit or getting your entry fees back if you have a losing lineup on Fridays. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match of up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB on PrizePicks for a deposit match of up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It is that easy. So we kind of went over this in the first segment, but I wanted to take a little bit more time to close out the show to really appreciate the spot the Royals are in right now, going into game 102 tonight, just 60 to go, and how far the Royals have come. And going all the way back to 2022, I think the feeling that everybody had about J.J. Picollo and how the fear of him being Dayton Moore 2.0 was going to rear its ugly head. That nickname, that label he had, it was going to show very early on. Now, I'm going to call myself out here. I am going to criticize myself. and go back almost 365 days. I put a lot of heat, a lot of pressure on JJ Picollo going into the trade deadline. And the fact that the Royals had been so quiet up until that deadline, they had acquired Cole Reagans, they had traded away Aroldis Chapman, but the trade deadline day had happened. And I remember it was 3 or 4 p.m. or getting close to that. And I had put out a tweet there. It's still out there. You probably could go back out there and clip it, screenshot it, whatever you want to do. But I'd said, here in 20 minutes or 30 minutes, whatever it was, I'm going to know everything I need to know about JJ Picollo. And that was simply implying that if he didn't make a move, he's Dayton Moore 2.0. If he was going to hang on to Scott Barlow and Ryan Yarbrough because they were good clubhouse guys, that by definition would be Dayton Moore 2.0, which was the main reason why the Royals were still rebuilding in 2022 and 2023. Because Dayton Moore would hang on to too many guys and not flip them for prospects because he didn't want to completely admit that they were rebuilding, that they needed prospects to boost the farm system. It just was something we weren't seeing back in 2018 and 19 and 20 and 21 and 22. They weren't trading off the guys that needed to be traded off. But I jumped the gun because then the news came out of Scott Barlow getting traded. Ryan Yarbrough got traded. Also at that point in time, Jose Cuas was traded. He was actually a little bit after the trade deadline became official, but that news is all rolling in. In the year before that, JJ Picollo traded Whit Merrifield, something that Dayton Moore just wasn't going to do for a number of years. And the Aroldis Chapman trade to pull the trigger at that point in time and find talent like Cole Reagans, to finding James MacArthur, who was a struggling 26-year-old AAA guy, never pitched in the big leagues. Now he's the closer for the Royals, and whether you like him or not, that's a big jump in 1 year. I mean, some of these moves, though they have been minor, they've shown you the type of GM and the president of baseball operations that he can be. Acquiring Seth Lugo in the offseason, or signing, let's call it that. Michael Wacha, Hunter Renfroe, John Schreiber, even guys like Chris Stratton, Will Smith. I mean, they're not going to be eye poppers, but they kind of just stabilized an area that was very weak. Even moves like Garrett Hampson and Adam Frazier. They aren't excellent moves, but they gave the Royals some protection, some stability there to build around their guys. And there's a big reason, a very telling reason why they're 56-45 right now, because they were transactional. They were aggressive in the offseason, and that was something JJ Picollo said he was going to do and now is going to continue to do. And John Sherman, though there is heat on him about the downtown stadium, it was reported not too long ago that he was willing to take on extra contracts, guys they had to pay more for, if that meant keeping the team competitive, getting them better by the deadline. And that was just something we didn't see in the Glass and Moore era. And yes, I think Dayton Moore was a phenomenal person. I think he cared a lot about the game. I think he cared a lot about his players. But JJ Picollo was always different. I think JJ Picollo thought differently than him. And there's not a single person in the baseball world that'll say a bad thing about Dayton Moore. I think a lot of the angst and the frustration came from the fans, but also GMs have a big responsibility. You sign a guy who's not good, that comes back on you. And JJ hasn't been perfect. But the Royals are in a spot now that few teams get the luxury of having. 1 year after losing 106, get that, losing 106 games to tie the franchise record, and the next year be 11 games over 500 on July 23rd, being buyers at the deadline, holding a playoff spot by 2 games, being 4 games out of first place in the American League Central, which, by the way, has been ridiculous this year. If the Tigers beat Cleveland tonight, 4 teams in the AL Central will be 500 or above. Now, the White Sox offset a lot of it because of how bad they are, but still, the job that he's done in 1 year, the job that Matt Quatrero, this coaching staff, has done, look, it's not to say that it ends up a great story this year. Maybe they don't make the playoffs. Maybe some of these moves don't end up working out. The guys they acquired at the deadline don't end up working out. But it's a matter of things feeling different in Kansas City. JJ Picollo has given fans a reason to buy in now, to go out to Kauffman Stadium, because there are talented players, and they're going to continue to add and try to make a push and give reason for fans to buy in, keep coming back, be there until the very end. And that's a big part of building a culture in Kansas City. And I feel like in 2 years, JJ Picollo has been trending in a positive direction in that light. Okay, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. One last shout out to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day, bringing you the biggest news, the biggest stories with all of our local analysts and experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now, available on the free Fire TV channels app. Tomorrow, we're going to recap Game 2 of this series in Arizona, and maybe if there's any more smoke around the Royals acquiring certain guys. There's been multiple articles on The Athletic and ESPN that is basically penciled in the Royals as the team to keep an eye on for some of those players. So we'll dive into that all tomorrow. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.